I stood in the driveway holding a set of brand new keys, while my mother was 500 miles away, laughing on another family vacation I wasn't invited to. She had no idea what I'd just done. No idea that in 24 hours her entire world would collapse. 7 years ago, she made a choice. Tomorrow, she'd finally pay for it. Make sure you stay until the end. I'll be giving my honest opinion on whether Anna was justified, or if she crossed a line. If you've ever been the black sheep, the scapegoat, or the child who was sacrificed for the peace of someone else, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this is the story of how I learned that the only way to beat a controlling parent is to play a colder, longer game. My name is Anna, and this is how I finally reclaimed my house and my sanity. The day Dad died, the ground shifted beneath my feet. I was 15, and the silence in our house was deafening. But what was truly shocking was how quickly the sound was replaced. Dad was meticulous. He was a successful, self-made man, and his will was an unchallengeable document of precise legal architecture. Since he and Mom were never married, he left everything: the primary residence, the investments, the rental properties, to me, his only child. Not a dime to her. The key was the vesting age, 21. Until then, everything was managed by a rigid trust, ensuring she couldn't touch a thing, no matter how hard she tried to challenge it in those frantic, early weeks. She stopped grieving and started plotting her next life. Just 2 months after Dad was gone, a man named Victor and his 2 grown children, Leo and Chloe, moved into our home, my home. Victor was immediately loud, demanding, and possessive. Everything Dad wasn't. Mom, then 45, was desperate to keep him. She was suddenly willing to sacrifice anything, or anyone, to maintain the illusion of this new, vibrant, blended family. And the easiest person to sacrifice was me. The atmosphere in the house became thick with unspoken tension. I wasn't neglected, but I was something far worse. I was irrelevant, a nuisance to her new, blended family portrait. The way she prioritized Victor's kids was sickeningly obvious. Leo and Chloe were always invited to the family outings. I wasn't. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway once, listening to Mom plan a trip to a beachfront resort with Victor and his kids. She caught my eye, and her expression immediately switched to one of saccharine. Feigned pity. "Oh, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Wouldn't you be happier visiting your paternal grandparents this weekend? You know how much they miss you." It was a perfectly crafted, passive-aggressive dismissal. It wasn't a question. It was an order cloaked in fake concern. Go be miserable with the side of the family who actually loves you, because you don't fit into the picture-perfect life I'm building here. That phrase became the mantra of my teenage years. You'd be happier elsewhere. The real war was fought with Victor. He was an unemployed, self-employed man, code for a man who used Mom's desperation as his income stream. He saw himself as the head of the household, and he loved to play the heavy. One evening, he tried to set a curfew for me. I was 17, and I looked him straight in the eye, my voice shaking with rage, and reminded him whose roof he was under. I didn't say it often, but when I did, the words landed like stones. "This is my house, Victor. You're just Mom's guest." The confrontation was brutal. Victor yelled. Mom wept, the practiced tears of a martyr, and begged me to cooperate. The fighting was ruining the peace. A few weeks later, she sat me down. She looked me in the eye, took my hand, and in a voice thick with performative sadness, told me I had to go. "Anna, I love you, honey. You know that," she whispered, squeezing my hand tight. "But Victor is leaving if I don't give him control. I need stability, and this fighting, I need peace at home." She didn't kick out the unemployed man who was causing the conflict. She kicked out the daughter whose legal ownership threatened his false authority. I was 17 when I packed a single suitcase and walked out the front door of my own inheritance. The sting of the rejection was a physical ache that settled deep in my bones. My wonderful paternal grandparents welcomed me instantly, turning their spare room into a sanctuary. I never forgot the feeling of that front door slamming behind me, the sound of my mother choosing a stranger over her own child. Mom still visited, of course. She brought baked goods and staged emotional hugs, always reiterating that she loved me, but that she had to keep Victor happy. She needed to look like a loving mother to the outside world, even as she kept me at arm's length, the inconvenient secret. The years I spent at my grandparents' house were my quiet years of planning. They gave me the space to study, to heal, and to grow up without the constant psychological warfare. But every birthday felt like a countdown. My 21st birthday was the turning point. The trust fund was legally transferred to my control. Overnight, I went from a dependent child to the sole owner of a substantial portfolio of assets, including the very house my mother and Victor were living in. It was a moment that should have felt triumphant, but it was hollow. I had the power, but I lacked the will to use it. I was a full-time student, and the thought of engaging in a messy legal battle with my mother, the endless drama, the public screaming, was too exhausting. So I let them stay. I paid the exorbitant property taxes every single year, quietly funneling thousands of dollars into maintaining their rent-free, luxurious life. While I lived on student loans and part-time wages, I told myself I was being mature. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The truth was, I was still conditioned by years of passive aggression and guilt to avoid making waves. I had been letting them live there for 2 years after my 21st birthday, effectively giving them free shelter while they continued to live their blended family fairy tale. The constant drain of the property taxes started to feel like emotional blackmail. It wasn't just money. It was the cost of my silence, the yearly ransom for their peace. The true wake-up call came when I finished college. I was 23 and accepted into a competitive, expensive master's program out of state. I sat down with my financial planner, and the numbers were stark. I had the assets, but to fund the degree without taking out massive loans, I needed immediate, sustainable, liquid income. The prime property my mother was occupying, the one I paid taxes on, could generate enough rental income to fund my entire master's degree. That realization was like a cold shock of water. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about my future. My father had provided this opportunity for me, and I was letting a man named Victor and his freeloading family steal it, simply because I was afraid of my mother's tears. I drove out to the house that weekend. I didn't call first. I just drove. I stood across the street, looking at the familiar bay window where I used to read. The house looked pristine, cared for, utterly stolen. I marched up to the door with the intent of handing over a formal written notice, complete with the legal timeline. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could connect with the wood, I paused. What was I doing? Giving them a heads up? Giving my mother time to spin a new story, to weaponize her tears, to manipulate the situation? I checked the windows. The house was silent, empty. Then I saw the luggage tags and the hastily closed door on the backyard shed. They were gone. On another family vacation, I pulled out my phone and called Mom. No answer. I left no voicemail. I just stood there realizing I had an unexpected window of opportunity, a moment of true, silent control. I wasn't going to have a conversation that ended with her asking me to sacrifice my education for Victor's comfort. I was going to secure my investment. The decision was cold, professional, and absolutely decisive. I called a high-rated, discreet locksmith from a town far away. I told him I had inherited the property, was the sole owner, and that I needed the locks changed and rekeyed immediately. I showed him the title deed, the tax records. Everything was in my name. The actual process was anticlimactic, yet deeply cathartic. Hearing the old tumblers click and the sound of the new mechanisms being installed felt like the physical sound of years of injustice being locked out. Once the new locks were in place, I had a simple, formal notice professionally printed and laminated, clearly stating that the former occupants were given 2 weeks to retrieve their personal property and vacate the premises, effective immediately. I affixed it to the front door with heavy-duty tape, ensuring it was visible, unmissable, and legally sound. But I wasn't done. The revenge had to be complete and legally airtight. I spent the next 2 days executing Phase 2, ensuring they could not use the house's address for any legal defense. I called the utility companies, and, as the recorded owner, placed a stop order on the automatic billing and transferred the service to my name. Then, I went to the post office and rerouted all mail for that address to a temporary P.O. box in a different county, meaning any official letter, Any bill or any future lease they might try to fake would be completely intercepted. The most satisfying part was calling the county tax assessor's office. I asked to verify the residential status of the property, mentioning that I suspected one of the occupants, Victor, had been fraudulently listing the address as the headquarters for his self-employed business to claim tax breaks. I gave them Victor's name and the assumed business name. I didn't make an official accusation. I just asked a question, as the owner, about whether this was allowed. I knew that just the inquiry would trigger a red flag review, tying Victor up in bureaucratic hell for months. The perfect, non-traceable revenge that attacked his greatest pretense, his supposed business empire. I had done what I needed to do. I had not only locked them out, I had legally dismantled their entire ability to exist at that address, cutting the anchor line to their stolen life. They arrived back yesterday, of course. I can only imagine the utter shock as Victor fumbled with the key, Mom impatiently waiting, and then the slow, dawning horror of reading the formal eviction notice. My phone blew up instantly. Furious, unhinged texts from Victor demanding to know what game I was playing. Hysterical voicemails from Mom, skipping the pleasantries and screaming about how dare I do this after they had been so kind to let me stay with my grandparents. I ignored them all. I let them sit with the consequences of their actions. I drove back into town today because the renovation contractors needed access to the backyard for preliminary work. I knew they would be waiting for me. I needed the confrontation to happen now, on my terms. I stood in the backyard, surveying the expensive patio furniture I had paid the property taxes on. I was ready. I heard the back door rattle, and then the glass slid open. They spilled out onto the patio, Mom, furious, Victor, livid, and Chloe, looking pale and distraught. "Anna!" "How dare you!" Mom shrieked, her voice high and uncontrolled, marching toward me. "You didn't even call! You just changed the locks like a thief." Victor stepped in front of her, trying to puff himself up. His eyes were narrowed, radiating pure venom. "You have absolutely no right to do this to us. Your mother lives here. We have tenants' rights." I looked at him, feeling nothing but a cool, clear confidence. The anger I had felt at 17 was replaced by the calm of a calculated adult. "Actually, Victor, I have every right," I said, my voice measured and low. I consciously kept my hand steady as I held the rolled-up renovation contract. "I own this house. I have the deed. I've been paying the property taxes on it every year since I turned 21. And the damage I saw inside the other day, the cracked kitchen counter and the ruined hardwood floor in the living room, proves you haven't valued it. You haven't paid a dime in rent or utilities for the last 2 years. You are not a tenant. You are a squatter." Mom's face crumbled, the anger giving way to her signature manipulation tactic. Tears. She didn't cry softly. She wailed, making sure Victor and the neighbors could hear her. Victor, seeing the tears, stepped up the aggression. "You are disrespecting your mother. After everything she's done for you, you treat her like this? What kind of monster are you?" "The kind of person who is taking back what is legally and morally mine," I stated, unfazed. I unrolled the letter and handed it to Mom, though she barely glanced at it. "You have 2 weeks. The renovation crew starts work in 3 weeks." Then came the emotional grenade I knew they would throw. Chloe, Victor's 19-year-old daughter, stepped forward, her hand dramatically placed on her stomach. "Where are we supposed to go?" she sobbed, the words aimed directly at my conscience. "I'm pregnant, Anna. We can't just be homeless." The air thickened. For a split second, I felt the old guilt, the old conditioning to yield to tears, but I pushed it down. I remembered the 17-year-old version of myself, standing alone on the curb, watching my mother choose Victor's peace over my stability. I looked directly at Chloe, then at my mother, and delivered the final, crushing blow. "Chloe, your situation is not my responsibility," I stated, my voice steady. "And Mom, you made your priorities clear 7 years ago when you kicked me out of my own home for keeping peace with Victor. You showed me exactly where I stood. I have a master's degree to fund, the education Dad paid for. This house is my investment. It is not your charity. It is certainly not Victor's." I took one final, long look at the trio standing defeated in the backyard, their faces contorted in disbelief, and then I delivered the closing act. "The renovation crew is here now," I announced, pointing toward the driveway where a white van just pulled up. I walked past them, toward the back gate, and spoke briefly to the crew foreman. The property is officially vacated. You can install the fencing and the for rent sign immediately. I turned and walked away, not looking back as I heard my mother's continuous, hysterical crying intensify, the sound now drowned out by the metallic clang of a shovel hitting concrete. The house was already in motion, moving on without them. The fallout has been messy. Mom's side of the family, whom I rarely speak to, are shaming me. They call me an ungrateful daughter, a heartless owner, and a monster for displacing a pregnant girl. Anna knows the truth. She let them live rent-free for 2 years after she became the legal owner. They prioritized their easy life and Victor's ego over her future. The truth is, Anna achieved her goal of taking back her inheritance and funding her education. But the collateral damage of Victor's innocent daughter remains a stain on the victory. So, this is where Anna's story ends, and we have to ask the difficult question. Was she a heroine or a monster? I've read thousands of these stories, and here is my definitive verdict. Anna had the legal right to take her house back, and her mother absolutely deserved the consequences. However, Anna lost her moral high ground the moment she used Victor's pregnant 19-year-old daughter as collateral damage. She didn't owe her mother kindness, but the coldness of the execution was needless. My final opinion is this: legally justified, but morally flawed. What do you think? Was this cold-blooded or perfectly justified revenge? Drop your opinion in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where entitlement meets its match.